Welcome to All Things in the Name of Love. If you like this show, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks. Welcome to another episode of All Things in the Name of Love. Today I have with me a beautiful soul who I just met, but we've been trying to do this for like a month and a half, I think. Michael Spremulli. Is that right? Okay. Who
You did
among
it. Yeah.
I did it, yay! Among other things, you are a vibrational astrologer, which I'm really curious about, but you also help with workspace personalities, which I think is really
Yes.
curious. And I love that blend, but I wanted to start off with how did this start?
Which part? Because
Well,
well, I'll give you my life history in under a minute and a half. How does that sound?
okay.
So you're right. My background and training is actually in clinical psychology with a specialization in personality and intellectual assessment.
Mm,
But let's go way back before I even got into graduate school.
okay.
And the year was 1994. And I'm working between my undergraduate and graduate degree. And I wasn't really sure what was going to happen next. I wasn't sure if I was going to go to graduate school. I felt very conflicted, confused, typical stuff for someone in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And someone at work had gifted me a reading with a traditional astrologer.
Oh,
And I
cool.
said, that's interesting. Now, I was raised in a faith-based system where astrology was a big no-no. You're not supposed to do that. So I
Hmm.
was somewhat conflicted, but I ended up having the consultation. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Back at that time, it was face to face, meaning, you go to the person's
Hmm.
office. She had a home office, went in, there were no smoke or mirrors or chakra beams or anything like that. It was just this middle-aged woman who had a big fluffy dog and had this paper that she was looking at, which contained my birth chart data. And for the next hour, I didn't say a word. She proceeded to summarize my life up to that point,
Wow.
highlight some of the situations that I was dealing with at that moment, and then proceeded to make some forecasting or predictions for the next 6 months to a year out.
Hmm.
And I left there kind of scratching my head. And then I said to myself, this is a very interesting world, and I want to learn more. Well, I ended up going to graduate school in like 90. It was later that year. I think it ended up getting admitted around, it was September is when the term started.
Hmm.
So, as you would probably already ahead of me here, academic institutions, they generally don't look too kindly on astrology and various and sundry topics. So I was certainly intrigued, but my focus at the time was getting my degree finished.
Hmm.
The whole while I had this interest in astrology, so I'd buy a book and kind of look at it and say, "Oh, this is kind of cool." I didn't know anything. Yeah, I would
Hmm.
just all I knew is that it was an interesting world and I'd like to learn more.
Hmm.
Well, I got out of there, started working in various mental health environments and what have you, and discovered that I was not an employee type of person. So I started a consulting company to help companies hire people based on matching personalities to the
Mm.
work that they would be doing. And I
Hmm.
still do that today. So I'm a bit of an anomaly because I have a foot in two different worlds.
Yeah.
Looking at my astrology chart now, it makes perfect sense as to why that is. But I was doing the corporate stuff and helping companies make the right hires and avoid the duds and all that. The whole while, quietly, I started ramping up my studies in astrology. And I started getting more books. And then, back then you had to buy DVDs because there was no YouTube or anything like
Hmm.
that. So I started studying and I said, oh, there's something to this, but it's not ready for my life center stage just yet.
Hmm.
Early 2000s, around 2007 or 8, I procured some professional astrology software. And I stress the word professional because
Hmm.
when everyone has access to astrology, it's not an exclusive thing, but if you want to dive in deep, you need the right tools.
Right.
And yeah, there's a lot of free software now online and what have you, but it's a whole nother ball game when you step into the specialized astrology that enables you
Hmm.
to do some real advanced calculations. And at this point, I still didn't know what I was doing. So what I would do is offer folks, look, I said, I'm studying astrology. If you'd like, I'd like to review your birth chart data, run some calculations, and see if any of this stuff makes sense. And I would do that with anyone within 150-foot radius, 150-mile radius of me. It would be like, you got kids? Give me their birth data. You got a spouse? Give me their. And I started interpreting these charts and getting feedback.
Mm.
And it was really fascinating to me. And then after I got my sea legs a bit, I said, well, let me try my shot at doing some forecasting, which is looking at what astrological trends may be coming down the pike for someone in the next 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do that, and they'd give me some feedback, several months later. And then a weird thing happened. People would start coming back to me and said, hey, that thing that you did where you kind of looked at the future? I said, yeah. They said, could you do that again for me for the next 6 months? I'll gladly pay you for it. And I said, sure.
Yeah.
That told me that there was some value to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so much so that they wanted to do it again and offer to pay me. And before you know it, I had a side hustle developed before the term side hustle was even put into existence, because I would do my corporate stuff. And then at
Mm-hmm.
nights and weekends, I'd be doing some astrology work. And I didn't advertise. I didn't kind of put it out there. It was sort of like referral only.
Mm-hmm.
The longest time I felt the need to keep these two worlds separate
Mm-hmm.
for obvious reasons, because I didn't want my corporate clients thinking that what I was doing was astrologically based, because I wasn't prepared to fight that battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want the astrology people to really think that all I was doing was just looking at personality traits and putting that together. So
Right.
life was good. I was kind of learning things. I learned traditional astrology, but there was always this one part that never really sat well with me.
Okay.
And I don't know how familiar you are with astrology. I'm assuming you've had your chart done
I have had
before.
my chart done. Most of it doesn't make sense to me.
Yep. And
But
that's typical. You see,
yeah.
so what I would find is that as I'd study other astrologers and take, maybe a weekend class here or watch some videos, there was this phenomena that I affectionately coined the term for as what I like to call crowbarring, meaning you'd interpret something in the chart, you ask the client if that made sense, and they'd say, well, yeah, maybe, but not really. And then many astrologers start jumping around the chart trying to make it fit. Oh, well, we
Oh.
got to look at the ruling planet for that house. All right, well, let's go look there. Does that make sense? No. Well, then we got to go look at this other impacting
Mm-hmm,
planet. And
mm-hmm,
then we got
mm-hmm,
to go and chase down the final dispositor in the chart. And that was the part that was like, yeah, because I have a data background,
mm-hmm.
I can't push this out to the world yet because it just doesn't square with what I've been
Right.
trained
Right.
in
Right.
until I ran across this individual who's still alive and well. In fact, I'm in an really advanced mentorship program with him now. His name is
Cool.
David Cochran. And David Cochran started working with astrology and researching astrology in the early 1970s.
Oh, wow.
Well, after 40 some odd years of research, right around 2010, he ended up putting together this system that I use today, referred to as vibrational astrology. And what
Mm.
resonated with me on the vibrational astrology side of things is that it's evidence based. It does not run away from data. The whole point of VA is let's look at the concepts that are out there in astrology and let's do research to see if what astrologers are saying and believing and using in their consultative practice actually jives with the data. Because if it does, that's great information. If not, then maybe we need to reevaluate some of the techniques we're using.
Mm-hmm.
And then the floodgates open. Because in vibrational astrology, we're not about the crowbar. We have
Mm-hmm.
very specific definitions of what everything means and how things come together. And within the past 20, past 10 or so years, 10 to 15 years, there has been so much actual research done in vibrational astrology that it's advancing the field at a very, very rapid pace. Yeah, we're just learning that some concepts that the ancients have talked about hold up and are valid. Other things are like, not so much.
Okay.
So it's a current form of astrology that brings this ancient wisdom into the forefront and reinforces that by information and data. And that's where it all gelled for me. It's like, okay, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of all fits because I'm not just because I have a hard time just doing something because someone said do it, you know,
I
and
understand
and
that.
And I'll be the first to tell you that astrologers typically have done a horrible job at conducting research
Mm,
because they just want to do their thing. Well, how do
right.
you know that this means that? Well, my teacher told me that. Well, where did they find it out? Oh, I don't know. That didn't work for me.
Hmm, hmm,
So the idea of astrologers doing research, most wouldn't even know where to begin.
hmm,
Academics don't know how to do astrology research because they don't know astrology. They know
hmm,
statistical methods, but they don't know astrology.
hmm.
Well, here's what sets David Cochran and his work apart. Not only has he known astrology, but he also has advanced degrees from the University of Florida in statistical and research design. So
Ooh.
he is sort of at the pinnacle of developing vibrational astrology as this evidence-based practice, and is very, very rigorous in the research that him and his team end up conducting. And if
Hmm.
something doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. So that was a little longer than a minute and a half, but that's kind of where I got to, how I got to where I am today.
No, that's beautiful. I appreciate that because I've had I'm so bad. Like I I know I'm an Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
I know the time I was born. I know the birthday, and
Yep.
I have to regularly look at the different aspects in my chart because I just don't remember them. I
Yeah.
know I
You know
have,
what?
but
Let me let you in a little secret. I'm a professional astrologer and I got to look at my chart. There's too much to keep up with. I mean, I know the big stuff, obviously, but that's normal.
okay.
And here's the thing with individuals using astrology. You don't need to become an expert astrologer. You need someone to explain it to you in a way that
Mhm.
makes sense. The fact that your moon may be aspecting with Saturn and forming a trine, that's great astrological speak. But what does that mean? What is
Right.
the underlying energy underneath that? And that's another thing that separates VA from other forms of astrology. Traditional astrology, Western astrology, Vedic, there's over 30 different systems. Some people
No.
say as much as 80 different types of
Wow.
systems of astrology out
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And what a lot of people do, and here's advice to anyone who's interested in learning some basic astrology, is you cannot just go and pick and choose, well, this piece from Vedic is interesting, and sidereal, this has an interesting concept, and here's West. Doesn't work that way. I
Hmm,
didn't know that coming up.
hmm.
I didn't know. I didn't have any astrologer friends to hang out with, or,
Right.
this pre-internet, or, right when the internet was coming online.
Yeah.
So the idea is when you're looking at any type of astrology, if you're wanting to learn it and get just some basic fundamentals, you got to pick a lane and stay in it,
Hmm.
because what works in one system doesn't necessarily work in the other system.
Yeah.
And one of the primary differentiating factors in VA is, unlike traditional astrology that is based on archetypes. And what I mean by archetypes is, a lot of people associate, let's say, the planet Mars with being the warrior and the fighter.
Hmm,
It can mean that, but it doesn't always mean that.
hmm.
The archetypes come from someplace. So what VA does is it studies the actual energetic processes that have fueled these archetypes. So
Mm.
that Mars example, yeah, someone might be a little fiery and warrior like, but Mars is the planet of action. That holds up 100% of the time. Now, how that aspect gets, or a planetary energy gets expressed, that's when we start to get into the nuance of things. But we are looking at energetic processes, not working from archetypes or these models that have been promulgated over the years. Not to say that there's nothing to that, but from a consistency standpoint, we're focused on what is the underlying energy, because once you figure out how your energy is designed to flow as an individual, then you can optimize that moving forward as the planetary cycles unfold, so that you know when you're going to be in certain cycles that will activate the way that you're energetically wired to behave. And that
Mm.
just makes my heart sing, because it's the blending of the metaphysical and the physical. The research,
Yeah.
the research in VA, let me just say this one thing because I get on a tear and I get excited. Uh, the research in VA is actually in alignment with research in modern physics, which is very, very exciting. So here's an example of that. Just recently, in the past year or so, they discovered that if they took one subatomic particle and split it in half, and then did something to it, either run current through it or isolated it. Now, I'm not a physicist. I don't pretend to be. I know enough physics to be dangerous, but this will illustrate the point. They split this subatomic particle and they put them in different rooms or in different cities or wherever. What they found was fascinating. And that is whatever they would do to one of those subatomic particles, the other one reacted the same way, even though it wasn't in the same physical space. Well, here we are now back to astrology talking about very similar concepts. The idea that planetary energy in the sky can have an impact on us with regards to our energetic process suddenly now becomes a little less woo-woo, and
Right.
there's some physical evidence to support that. Now,
Mm,
we don't know a whole lot yet. We know a lot more
right.
than we have, but
Right.
stuff is always being discovered. And the idea that the theory behind vibrational astrology does not conflict with physics is a very promising, positive step in the right direction.
No, I was going to ask you about that because I dabble in under like body talk is all about
Mhm.
quantum physics. It takes elements of
Yeah,
chiropractic, kinesiology, Chinese traditional medicine, Ayurvedic, a little Aboriginal, Australian, and then consciousness.
yeah.
And
And,
so,
and the name of the game is it all comes down to energy. That's it.
right,
You know, we hear this,
right.
and everyone bandies that term around, and half the people don't even know what they're saying. But if we're energetic beings, okay, and we've existed prior to this physical body, and will probably exist beyond that, energy can't be created or destroyed, one of the
Mm-hmm.
basic tools, mantras in physics, then it does lend some support that if it's all energy, that's what we need to study and figure out how it's optimally designed to flow through you, energetically
Mm-hmm.
speaking, and then harness those cycles when they come around to kind of grease the skids for things to flow much more easily, and then avoid certain things during certain periods when that energy is not exactly at its prime flowing through us in the way that it's meant to.
I love that because it just makes, I mean, astrology has been a foreign language to me.
Mhm.
I appreciate it and I've seen the relevance to it, but to bring in the quantitative part of it to make it digestible for non-astrologers and help us be able to see the deeper relation of the
Yeah.
different elements within us. I mean, because that connection of the energies in the realm of, let's say, my chart, I like when I've had astrology done before, it's been like, okay, I'm going to speak a foreign language and I'm not going to tell you what it is. And you're just going
Uh,
to nod your
oh,
head
that just
blank.
makes me, ooh, I just want to cringe when I hear people, because when I'm consulting with the client, my goal is not to teach them astrology because
Hmm.
that takes years.
Right.
But what my goal is to let them know. And I have some disagreements about this with other astrologers because some people just get in on a tear. Oh, well, your moon is sestra quadrat. You're no, nobody cares. But I do want to let people know where this is coming from. They don't
Hmm.
necessarily have to, and if they want me to dive deep during that time, I can, but it's not a matter. Here's another term that makes me cringe: intuitive astrology. There's no such thing. Sorry. Now, you might have an intuitive approach as to what you look at first in a chart, but either you're practicing an intuitive type of reading or consultation, or you're doing an astrological type of consultation. To say intuitive astrology basically says, well, I can say anything I want because and that's not what astrology is. You're an
Yeah.
intuitive. That's
Yeah.
cool. Embrace that. But to blend the two together, it's a nonsense term, in my
Mm,
opinion.
that makes sense because, like, to me, from what I've seen, it's very geometrical. It's very
Yes.
mathematical. It's, I mean, and I know the vibration is the music and the math combined.
Mhm.
Um, but to take a mathematical system and to try to make that intuitive doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And the idea of the mathematics being the underpinnings, I often say astrology is a lot more math and geometry than anything else, because what we're
Mhm.
looking at are patterns and
Mhm.
different angular formations that occur based on what's going on in your natal chart or what's happening in the sky. And when we get within certain ranges of how close these planets are engaging with your chart and just the collective at whole, that's where we're able to see from a consistency standpoint, certain things coalesce because there are standards and a process of going about it. It's not just willy nilly. You know, so
Right.
I love Tarot. Tarot is fantastic. I learned Tarot many, many, many years ago, but that's open to a whole bunch of interpretation. And that's
Mhm.
great. That's cool. It has a fantastic purpose. I'm looking at the shelf. I probably have 30 decks over there, but that's a different tool for a
Mhm.
different purpose.
Right. No, I understand that because it's that that is more intuitive, like based on feeling the energy and translating it into language. But the math, it's
The math is the math.
yeah, it's
Period. The
math.
end. I mean that's it. You know.
Yeah, it's like you can't manipulate math. It's just math. And
Yeah.
so the fact that it's how does that I've got to like it's coming deeper because I love going. So how does that work in your brain? Like how does your brain like combine the math with the psychology with
Okay. So
yeah.
so I see where you're going, I think. So let me
Okay.
give you a little mini VA vibrational astrology lesson.
Okay.
First off, and this will blow a lot of people's minds, and if there are any astrologers listening out there, uh, they may come after me with pitchforks, but you know, so be it. When you speak to most people about astrology, the first thing they're going to start rattling off are the signs. Oh, I'm a Capricorn. I'm an Aries. I'm this. I'm that. Okay. The signs, according to modern vibrational astrology research, they do play a part, of course, but they give just a bit of color to the situation,
Hmm.
meaning that the signs aren't nearly as important and as impactful as what we've been led to believe.
Okay.
What is important and mission critical are the planets, because the planets are where the energy comes from. In VA, each planet regulates a particular energetic process. And I can run through them if you want real quick,
Yeah, yeah,
from sun
please.
from sun to Pluto, just so you get an idea.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
and then I can pull the math back in and show you how that all comes together. So when you first start out learning vibrational astrology, you got to learn what the function is of each of the planets and what energetic process they regulate. Well, you don't
Mm.
even get that. I remember when I was studying VA, for the first time, you don't even get into signs until like the third course.
Oh
It's
wow.
the planets, because the planets are the what. So the sun, whenever the sun's involved, and when I say involved, that means aspecting, connecting, or predominantly placed in your chart. The sun basically is kind of dumb. Nothing against the sun, but the sun is, it shines a light on what's here and now, what's important. Okay. So wherever the sun is placed in our chart or whatever it aspects with, it makes it front and center in our life. The moon tends to regulate our emotions and feelings and things that have to do with our ancestry and understanding people. Mercury, a planet that most people are familiar with because everyone panics when Mercury goes retrograde, and there's no reason to do that. It's a whole nother conversation. Mercury connects thoughts and ideas. So here's an example, just by learning those three pieces. Let's say that the sun, which makes things front and center in our life, happens to be connecting with or forming a circuit with Mercury, either in your natal chart or transiting planets or aspecting either the sun and or Mercury. Well, that sets the energy flow up to be a perfect time for you to communicate ideas to the world. Why? Because Mercury connects thoughts and ideas. The sun makes them front and center in our life for everyone to see. So the way that you start building out the interpretations is you combine the energy elements. And when I say elements, I'm not talking about fire, air, earth, and water in
Right.
traditional astrology. I'm talking about what does the planet regulate? And you combine those meanings together like a recipe. And that's where you start to see the energetic processes unfold. So I'll continue on. So after
Yeah.
Mercury, we have Venus. Venus is regulating what we are attracted to. I often say this can be persons, places, or things. Certainly, Venus is involved in romantic relationships and even some platonic relationships, but it could also regulate that we're attracted to nature, or we like sunsets, or we like whatever, right? After Venus, we have Mars. Touched on Mars before. Mars is the planet of action. Wherever Mars is present in our chart and whatever it aspects with, we tend to have a lot of ambition and drive and want to do something. Mars is what gets you up out of bed in the morning to say, all right, today I got to go wash the car, or I got to get groceries, or I've got to work on this project. Mars is where the action gets played out. After Mars, we have Jupiter, the planet of expansion. When Jupiter's involved, it tends to blow things up really, really big. Think of it like an air pump pumping up a balloon. And the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not inherently good or bad. Whatever Jupiter's connecting with and where it's placed in the chart indicates what is going to get big. More often than not, Jupiter is associated with good fortune and things that are expansive and growing. But if you got Jupiter hanging out with a planet like Pluto, which could be a little impulsive, you can see how that can end up taking a different turn. After Jupiter, we have Saturn. And whenever I talk about Saturn, I'll talk to the astrologer folks out there, even if you're just dabbling in astrology. One thing that we do not use in vibrational astrology are planetary rulerships. A lot of times people say, oh, where Saturn is in your chart, it's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. It's going to be the big bad malefic. We don't use that terminology. It's not modern. And that's not how these planets work. What Saturn does is it takes away anything that is superficial. And yeah, that could be a little bit of a grind. It takes away our toys, is how David teaches that. Meaning, if you have an aspecting Saturn, or transiting Saturn, rather, meaning the transit in the sky is hitting a part of our chart, it's going to help us see the purity of a situation and take out all the garbage that isn't needed. We may not like that, but it helps strip away things down to the bone.
Yeah.
Uranus is the planet of rebellion and breaking out of the norm and focusing on the here and now. We notice this in a lot of musicians' charts, real famous, like Miles Davis and people, the Carpenters, people who've been these icons of music. When you go to look at their charts, they tend to be able to live in the moment, because when you're playing music, you have to be focused on the here and now. You can't worry about the car that didn't start or where you're going to go get dinner. You've got to live in the here and now. So they tend to have a lot of Uranian energy to work with. We've got Neptune, which a lot of people say, oh, that's the psychic planet. Can be. Here's what it represents in VA. It's what is magical to you. And what is magical to you is going to be completely different than what's magical to me, or the baker down the street, or the person who ends up, grooming your dog. When we're talking about magical, think of an idealistic situation. We're recording this on the heels of the Super Bowl. There are some people who their life dream is to go to the Super Bowl and see it live. That's magical to them. I couldn't care less. It's just not magical to me.
Right.
All right. Other things are magical to me. So the Neptune is this planet of regulating what is magical to us. And then finally, I think I got them all. If I missed one, let me know. The final planet that's furthermost out there is Pluto. And yes, we still refer to it as a planet, even though it's been demoted in status. Astrologers still refer to Pluto as a planet. And for the people who are very particular out there, the sun and moon, even though they're not technically planets, they are technically luminaries in astrology. We group them in with the planetary lineup just for the sake of ease. So when I refer to the sun as a planet, don't send me hate mail, because it's a luminary, but we put it in the planetary bucket. Anyways, Pluto, another planet that often gets a bad rap. Pluto is one of these planets that enables us to have like unbridled passion. In fact, I just did today's daily forecast, because I do those on TikTok that people can go, and we'll explain where to get them later. Pluto is one of these planets that brings this intense compulsion and drive. And it's like a big id. Pluto wants
Okay.
what it wants when it wants it. By itself, it doesn't do too much. But if Pluto aspects with your Saturn, for example, then you're all about living this ascetic life. You're cutting out anything that's non essential and you live in a shack in the woods to find the meaning of life somehow.
Hmm.
Not everybody can do that. I
Right.
certainly couldn't do that, but a lot of people who have a Pluto Saturn placement, it's this compulsion to strip everything away. So you
Mm.
can see how you start to build out the energy processes depending on what planets are involved
Yeah.
at any given point. And when you're dealing with one or two, it's fairly straightforward. When you
Hmm.
have five planets that are aspecting, they all have a seat at the table. And that's where the skill then comes from a professional astrologer to be able to pull all that together and explain it in a way that makes sense and that incorporates all the energy from all the planets that are playing in that particular aspect. And the reason that's important is that one type of energy does not cancel out another type of energy.
Hmm.
So I like to think of the planets, and when I teach basic astrology, I think of the planets as being ingredients in a recipe. Could be chili, could be a cake, whatever it is that is of interest to you that you like to eat. Every planet brings a specific note to that recipe,
Hmm.
and they do not get canceled out. So when we do the interpretation, we have to then blend all that together and explain to the client what the energetic process is like and what to expect.
Hmm.
So that's sort of a basic bare bones run through of these planetary energies, what each one regulates. And that's the building blocks that everything else in vibrational astrology is built upon.
That's really fascinating because, like, when I think about when I've heard traditional astrology, it's been like, well, you're Aquarius, so you have Saturn and you have Uranus and blah 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 blah, blah as your rulers, and it feels it's never resonated with me to hear that
Right.
language
Yep.
because it's like I don't really feel like I can see influences,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see being ruled by, and so it's always felt like this dissonant language for me, and it's just curious to see like how you explained it feels much more aligned with what makes sense.
Well, when you go back and you bring up a good point about rulerships, astrology is approximately 2,000, some people say 3,000 years old. It's a different time back then.
Hmm.
There were things called time lords and dashas in Vedic astrology. It was a different type of language. We don't
Hmm.
speak like that today, number one. We
Right.
just don't. And many astrologers still use rulerships, and that's cool. If it works for them, great. I'm not here saying that my way is the only way, not by any stretch.
Right.
This is what resonates for me.
Hmm.
If rulerships work for you, use rulerships. But what happens when we take that out and focus primarily on the planetary energies? It's a much more pure interpretation. So let me
Hmm.
pull this like an example of a sign in real quick. We were
Yeah.
talking before about Saturn and Pluto. So
Hmm.
Pluto is this compulsive desire by itself doesn't do much. Well, we connect it to Saturn. Now that compulsive desire is going to be let's strip it all down to the bare bones, strip it down to the bare wood, and we start over or we get rid of all the nonsense that isn't important. Okay. Now here's how the signs come into play.
Okay.
12 signs of the zodiac. Each sign also has a different energetic process according to the research, and a lot of it is different than what we've been led to believe. Let's say you have that Saturn Pluto combination going on in Capricorn. I'm a
Okay.
Capricorn, so we'll use me. Well, Capricorn is all about viewing the world through a detached perspective. Capricorn's energy from a VA perspective is really good at sitting back and saying, yep, tree just came through my house. Here's what I got to do next. And not get whipped up into an emotional frenzy. It's like, this sucks. I don't like it, but here's what we got to do. Versus if, let's say, you have a situation where, we'll take Sagittarius, for example. Sagittarians like to explore. They want to see what's going on next. What's the next, what's on the other side of the mountain. If you had a Saturn Pluto aspect in the Sagittarius part of your chart, it's still going to have that same energy with Pluto as the compulsion. Saturn strips it down to the essentials, but it's going to be different as far as how it gets colored by Sagittarius versus Capricorn. Because Sagittarius might say, all right, well, there's a tree in my house. Now's a good time for me to tour the world because I don't have to worry about this while it's getting repaired, or maybe I'm just going to leave or move out, or, whatever the case is. So the signs do play a role,
Okay.
but it's like you can't use the signs to describe someone's way of being unless there's something in there to describe in the first place. In other words, just because someone has Sagittarius at a specific part in their chart, if there's not a lot of planets aspecting in that section of the chart, that energy isn't going to be nearly as pronounced. So I want to be careful. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I do find that it's important to explain that we're not poo-poo signs, but you want to not give them more credit for things that they are not responsible for.
Mm. No, I appreciate that because it's like, for me, my birthday's Saturday, so like I'm right on the cusp.
Yep.
And so I've seen elements of Aquarius and elements of Pisces in me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always felt weird because the descriptions of Aquarius are like, oh, you're tech, which is laughable to me.
No,
I'm
but okay,
not.
so let me jump in because I love this. I love this. So let me see if the VA definition of Aquarius fits you
Okay.
more appropriately. Now, again, if you're rising sign, I'd have to look at your chart and
Yeah,
see
yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on. But let's assume you have multiple placements in Aquarius, and a placement is just a fancy term meaning that there's a planet hanging out in that sign, or two planets, or three, or more, or whatever.
Okay.
Aquarians tend to view themselves as being one part of the whole,
Mm.
part of the network. It's like my contributions are just as important as yours. You need mine, and I need yours in order for this system to function collectively. That's a VA definition of
Mm.
Aquarius. It's not, well, you're going to be big in tech or your career is going to be, focused in that area. It's more of that idea of we are all serving a particular part here, and we can't do it without each other. I'm
Mm.
not better than you. You're not better than me. We each have something to bring to the party. Is that more in alignment with
Oh,
the way
yeah.
that you tend to? So you see
My
how just now, can it mean tech? Sure. The Pluto just moved into Aquarius back in
yeah.
January. That's a big deal because it's
Yeah.
been in Capricorn for all this time, and it blew up the old system.
Mhm.
Now we have work from home, and that coincided with COVID, and that kind of reset everything. So
Mhm.
now it's about, and we just got in there. It's going to be in there for 20 years. That's a
Yeah.
generational type of transit.
Yeah.
So what are we going to see? Yeah, we're going to see massive technology developments. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get involved with that, but it's going to be the democratization of now one person with a cell phone can go and build a YouTube channel and get, 50 million viewers, where in the past you had to go on national TV.
Mhm.
That's how this stuff kind of comes to play
Mm.
out because it's more of a connectedness.
I
So
like that.
that's how the signs play into things. Now you mentioned you said you're out on the cusp, so it's Aquarius and the other
Pisces.
Pisces. All right, so Pisces is like everything. Pisces is the collective of putting it all together. So if you've got placements in Pisces, there's probably a part of you that's like, all right, well, I've studied this modality, I've studied that modality, I've read this, I've done that. Now it's my job to integrate it and put it
Mhm.
all together.
Mhm.
And that energy happens from a Piscean perspective. What that energy is going to look like, then we go to look at the planets to see how that is aspecting and pulling in some of those Piscean attributes as well.
That's fascinating. I love that because like for me, it's always been my favorite way of being is collaborative.
Yeah.
And that whole narrative of what I've seen in other realms of astrology is like, no, I'm supposed to the narrative is nope, we're really tech. I'm like, oh, that's laughable.
No, no,
And
see, and that's why this little exercise that we just went through here, this is why I love vibrational astrology so much,
yeah.
because we're not assigning things that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, could someone with a lot of Aquarius end up in tech? Sure, but that's not a guarantee.
Right.
It's just not, because remember, it's an energetic model. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
archetypal model. That's the North Star in vibrational astrology. What is the underlying energy process?
Mm-hmm.
How that gets applied can be done in a whole bunch of different ways. Let's say someone's really good with details, and I'm just speaking arbitrarily, completely setting aside astrology for the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, someone who's really good with their hands and working with details, they could be a high-end artisan cook or baker. They could work on soldering electrical parts to a board. They could be a woodworker. There's a million ways to play out details.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to jam you into a category. That's
Right.
coming, where you might be attracted to and where that energy is going to flow. That's a planetary function,
Mm.
not a sign function.
That's fascinating. So do you feel like you're getting a more holistic um ability to interpret how the astrology is showing up in a person's life than traditional astrology?
I believe so.
Okay.
Others may differ, but here's my experience with VA. VA is really good at getting to the heart of the matter very quickly.
Okay.
And if I'm in a town and someone's, at a metaphysical book shop doing readings, I'll always have a reading. I want to see what people are doing out there. I don't tell them I'm an astrologer, and I'm not there to give them a hard time.
Right.
I pay my money, I do my thing, and that's it. I
Mm-hmm.
look at that as research because I'm a researcher by training.
Yeah.
So when VA really shines is the more specific a question that someone has, the more quickly I can look and see what's going on, because there are different places in these higher octave charts that get to the information. And we don't have to play this, well, do you like tech? Oh, maybe you like sailing. Maybe you like, it's
Right.
not that. It's getting to the core of the matter. And even if someone is totally unsure of, like, well, what's my next move? First thing I'm looking for is, there's certain vibrational charts that we always look at, and then they go up into the hundreds and various octaves of the core or prime vibrations to get more clarification. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see which vibration in an individual is the strongest, because we
Mm.
haven't even spoken about the vibrations yet. The
Right.
vibrations are like these higher octaves based off of the natal chart. And the best way to
Mm.
describe that is, think about when you were in high school biology and you had to look at something under a microscope. And you look at it, it's like, oh, look, there's a cool cell. You see the nucleus and all that. And then the instructor says, all right, now switch the magnification from 10 times to 50 times. And it zooms in just on the nucleus of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you're looking at things at a real high level from a magnification standpoint. That's where these vibrational charts come into play, because
Mm.
we're able to see what's going on at a real nuanced level.
Ooh.
And that's where we're able to quickly help someone figure out, all right, well, they've got a very active 11th vibration. That vibration in particular has to do with a sense of inherent restlessness. They're always wanting to do something else. It's like, all right, let's get this done. Now we're going to move to something else. Now we're going to hit the next level. Now we're going to, not everyone has an active vibration.
Mm-hmm.
People with a high 11 vibe, they get bored very easily if they're not doing something and they're not
Mm-hmm.
making strides to answer the question, what's next? If someone's 11th vibe doesn't have a lot of activity in it, meaning there aren't many placements or aspects, that's not going to be as nearly important to them. They may be more of a 7 vibe type person, which is more introspective
Mm.
and looking at things internally and spending a lot of time alone contemplating the meaning of life, their plans, where they're going to go, and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So when people come to me for guidance, I never say, well, you should be a plumber or you should be a videographer. I'm focusing on it, and I'll ask them, because this is how we refine our models. I
Mm-hmm.
don't ever say you should be this. I'll say your 7th vibe is very active. There's a lot of stuff going on in there that suggests that you like to spend a lot of time alone thinking things through. It doesn't mean that you're antisocial, but it's that inward focus, this
Mm-hmm.
calmness. Maybe spend years working on a craft. Does that make sense to you? And if they say yes, all right, great. Now we know that that vibe is confirmed as being a big energy focus in your life. And if you're looking to shift careers, you probably want to look at careers that embody that type of energy,
Mhm.
as opposed to going to be a PR agent someplace where you're constantly in front of people and you're going to be pulling your hair out, because that's the opposite of the energy that makes you tick.
Mm, that is so fascinating. Just have to pause there for a second because I'm like,
It's a lot.
it's just,
It
but it's
really,
beautiful.
it is beautiful, because not only does the data bear it out, it makes sense. And when you start looking at astrology through this type of a lens, for me personally, I can't go back. Now, that doesn't mean we don't use other techniques. I mean,
Mhm.
we do progressions and we look at returns and all these type of things. But the core of what I do, I'd say I'm 80 to 85% of vibrational astrologer first. And then depending on the question, we'll pull in some other techniques that might not have as much of the data behind it, just to kind of see if it plays out. But then we kind of use that to build and refine the models. And in fact, there's a conference coming up, online conference, on March 2nd, that is based on current vibrational astrology research. So I am going to be attending. I don't have any financial affiliation with them, but I believe the website is vibrationalastrologyconference.com. And you can see some of the things that's going to be presented this year based on what the research teams have been looking at, through analyzing, thousands and thousands of charts and looking to see where these various things coalesce and how it shows up.
Wow. Pause. Mm. Okay, so have you integrated your life between the corporate world and the astrology world at all?
That's an excellent question. So here's the best way to answer that. I was so fearful for many years of, oh my gosh, what if my corporate people find out? I don't bring it up to corporate
Okay.
people, because they, that's not what they hire me to do,
Okay.
unless they bring it up first.
Okay.
I mean, now I've got social media channels, I've got followers on TikTok, and I'm a, small potatoes in the grand bucket of things out there.
Mhm.
But I do have, interestingly enough, some of my corporate clients who've stumbled upon me and said, well, this may sound a little weird, but we're thinking about doing some expansion. They own the business sometime over the next 6 months. Can we do one of those astrology things to just kind of see what sure, absolutely.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
don't actively hide it. But
Hmm.
at the same point, if you come to me for personality assessment services, that's what we're doing. If you come to me for astrology, that's what we're doing. And if there's a meaningful opportunity to potentially bridge the worlds, I do that. But I'm just not now at this point. It's like, I don't care if my corporate folks discover that I'm in astrology, because I got the data to back it up. I think
Right.
one of the reasons that caused me to really want to keep those worlds separated is I didn't have the data. It was just
Right.
basically hand me down astrology.
Hmm.
But now there's data there, and it's, like many things in life, I was making a bigger issue out of it, being a potential problem, than it actually was.
When I was intuitively guided to start the podcast in 2018. For a year, I was just like, I'm just going to record myself and send it to my friends.
Mhm.
And then 2019, it was like, no, no, actually, yeah, get to start the podcast. And I was like, what are people gonna think? And for the first, because I wasn't interviewing anyone. I was just talking about what was coming through me. And I
Right.
just got so self-conscious. And then after the fourth one, I started getting guests. I was like, oh, that's what the point is. It's like had nothing to do with me. I'm the platform through which these
Right.
messages can come. And I'm just happen to be a great listener. So like this is a great thing for me to do. But man, like that fear of what are people gonna think?
Yeah.
That's an illusion.
Well, and here's the other thing too. There's a lot more people into all this stuff than you'd ever realize.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, and something else that I discovered early on my astrological journey, throw all your preconceived notions of who you think may be into this out the window,
Hmm.
because I've had people who were super religious say, tell me more. I've had people who I thought would be into astrology just had no interest. So you just don't know. You
Right.
really don't. And by the way, religion and astrology happily coexist. I know not one, but two Baptist preachers, Baptist preachers who are professional astrologers. And they
Wow.
can go and show you where astrology has been referenced in the Bible. So it's not,
Wow.
we're not talking about sacrificing farm animals here. It's not that way at all. We're looking at charts and graphs. It's
Hmm.
math and geometry. But yeah, so it's a real interesting time because
Yeah.
with this new way of looking at astrology, I mean, it's still magical and fascinating. I don't
Hmm.
want to take anything away from it. It's just amazing how this stuff works, but
Yeah.
it's not nearly as mysterious or scary as I think it has been
Hmm.
positioned to be throughout the years because there's data behind it.
Yeah. That is beautiful. Oh, Michael, this has been such an exhilarating and fascinating conversation, and I'm so
Thank you. I've
grateful.
enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And I'm just going to ask you one final question because I have something at like 2:15 my time. How do people find you?
Sure. Very easy. I'm in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's real easy to remember. I'm not going to ask you to remember my name, but remember Blue Ridge Astrology. So blueridgeastrology.com. I'm on TikTok under the same moniker, Blue Ridge Astrology. I do daily forecasts out there on the collective. Obviously, they're not going to be nearly as personal as if I work with someone individually, but it gives you a tone of the energy for the day, much like a weather report.
Hmm.
I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. Again, it's consistent across all platforms. Blue Ridge Astrology, you can, if you go to the website, you can see what I'm doing there regarding offerings for individual consultations. I teach some basic astrology classes, even if you're not interested in being a professional astrologer. In fact, I just started a cohort this past week. And then I also have some astrological report services. So I've got something available from free if you just want to kind of dip your toe in the water all the way on up the line. And welcome to see folks come my way. And if they got questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom, and for your beingness on the planet. I'm so grateful to know you and finally have this conversation.
Yeah, it was like the planets were conspiring against us. What your listeners don't know is this is like the third time we had to schedule this, but one issue I had some issues and you had a conflict, but we're
I
here.
had
So
power outage, you had power outage, it was like a whole thing, but
exactly. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and we should do this again because,
definitely.
honey, we ain't even scratched the surface on
I
this.
already felt that. I already felt that. Thank you so
And I
much.
say that with no disrespect. It's like I'll say that to mentors, like, honey, we don't even get started here. But
Right.
that's the beauty of it. It's just layers and layers, and it's fun
Mm,
stuff.
thank you.
Thank you.